All right, Kyle. I know we talked privately before, but still, like, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yeah. I'm Kyle. I work for the Arizona Cardinals currently, but my path is played college football, University of Nevada, worked as assistant strength coach down there for 5 years with all kinds of sports. Football, men's basketball is in charge of track, women's soccer. So, mid-major life, you kind of have a lot of teams you deal with. And then I went to University of Washington as an assistant strength coach originally under Chris Peterson and Coach Tim Saha and that whole crew. And then my position changed. I was at Washington. I was there for 6 years. It went from an assistant strength coach to the coordinator of sports science, and then it was essentially a director role of in charge of sports science and nutrition. And then I worked 12 months at Strive, which is a wearable tech company, Surface EMG in shorts with an accelerometer in the belt buckle, which I was the director of performance there. And that was actually really beneficial for me as a strength coach because now you're looking at muscles from a different lens. And then I jumped on board here at the Arizona Cardinals as the coordinator of sports science and assistant strength coach last April. So that's my path. It's about almost 20 years in the making, but there we go.
Cool. So for all those sport you work with, like, what sport like you like the most or you enjoy working with the most?
I like football, but I will have to say I miss working with all different kinds of sports. So at a lower level, University of Nevada, you have exposures to all different sports, all different types. So you're looking at actual like genotypes and different athletes, male, female. So I miss, and I've been in football now for the past almost 10 years. So I do miss working with, soccer and basketball. Very different than football. Different challenges. And yeah, I probably miss that the most.
Cool. So, how does like working with all those sport help you grow as a coach? Help you like maybe learn something?
Yeah, I think it makes you a well-rounded coach, to be honest with you. And I think nowadays, a lot of coaches that are younger getting into the field, they want to just do one sport. I actually think that's probably stunting the growth of some people. And the reason I'm saying that is because you have different energy systems at different sports. So basketball and soccer energy systems, very different than football. There's some commonalities, but also too, probably the characteristics and the actual underpinnings of the demands of the sports, very different. So exposes people to different ways to train, especially when I was at Nevada, football, basketball, soccer, track, very different across the board. So I think it makes you a well-rounded coach to kind of have more tools in your toolbox, trying to understand, when you have soccer versus football, what do you do? You can't just hit replay on a football program for soccer. It's not going to work. So I think just taking a step back, looking at what you have to do from demands of the sport, but also to conditioning the athlete and making them more resilient. Um, I think that's probably the best thing I learned is just I made a lot of mistakes. And I think that's one thing too, is like make mistakes, program, do some things that you learn from, either good, bad, and different. But I would say it's just exposing coaches to different athlete types. And so they're just getting outside their comfort zone.
Nice. I feel like I do like feel like nowadays young strength coaches they only want to like stuck with one kind of sport. So I like my background is kind of like I work with rugby in
Hmm.
Taiwan, work
Yeah.
with women's soccer, men's basketball, badminton, boxing, all
Yeah.
those
Yeah.
sports. And now at Louisville, I help basketball with their strength and conditioning. I help like track and field with their jump.
Hmm.
So like from all of those, but like I learned how to watch like people, how to move, watch your hip, watch your ankle, like the arm position. And you also mentioned the other thing is about like when you're young, you're like it's probably good to make some mistakes. Can you like
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that?
Oh yeah, I can talk all about it. No shame there. So when I was at University of Nevada, like getting my feet wet in strength conditioning. I was young, 23, 24 years old, thinking I knew everything in strength conditioning. I knew nothing. And that's what I'm talking about is you program, you have mistakes. What are those mistakes? Injuries. And so, in my opinion, injuries are loading errors. And so I had, in one season, I had four ACLs on the women's soccer team. Now, am I going to take full credit from that? No, but I had a big piece of that. And so, you kind of have to understand, why are these happening? Why are these ligaments blowing apart? And they all happen pretty close together. So that was one learning lesson for me. And then also, two, me myself, I've ruptured both patellar tendons, and I did that, and about 11 months apart from each other. So I've been exposed to ligament and soft tissue damage that probably a lot of people haven't, but I think that makes you a better coach, because if you can work with injured athletes and you can work with hurt athletes, you'll be able to work with healthy athletes. Healthy athletes are fine. It's like a sponge. You do anything with them and they'll get better. Whereas injured athletes, you have to be more calculated. You have to hedge your risk. You have to understand principles better to apply methods. And I think that's where early on I made big, big mistakes with injuries and or people not meeting the demands of the sport so they look out of shape. And so, you kind of have to sit back and keep diving deeper. I'm very curious. I always want to find root problems. I think a lot of people don't. They just want to be told what to do. So I think I'm curious. And I think that's something too is be curious, make mistakes, learn from it, but get better from it. Don't keep making the same mistake.
Nice, nice. So you mentioned that you have four torn ACL during a season. So
Yep.
at that time, are you like scared, like scared or like what is what like how do you feel at like when it happened?
Well, one happened, then the other happened, and I was like, whoa. One can be like, maybe so-called like freak incident, which I'm not a big fan of that word either with injuries. Um, but when you had four, I was like, there's something going on here, and there's something in the training, and these forces and these demands of their sport aren't meeting to what they can actually attenuate or produce. And so there's a giant loading error. There's a big gap from training to actual like game demands. We need to get those training demands closer to game demands. So you don't have this giant gap or this cliff where people get hurt. Um, so that led me into diving into soft tissue, learning more about muscles, learning more about ligaments, tendons, actually how to train those so we can make them, more resilient, stiffer. But I think at the end of the day, humans are just they're walking structures like a building, and the injuries happen from the path of least resistance. Forces are going to expose paths of least resistance and blow it apart pretty quickly.
Cool, cool. So, for all those like sports and now at football, 20 years of experience, you don't have like GPS data way back. You don't have force plate way
No,
back.
no.
But now you have like all those fancy stuff. Like, how did these sport technology kind of like change how you view? Did it change how you view performance?
That's a good question. No, it maybe changed my mind to understand the demands of accel, decel, max velocity probably a little differently. Um, Looking at just accelerometry data, looking at some GPS data, stuff of that nature, and then using force plates. But no, when I first started, it was pen and paper. So we would do surveys with pen and paper. I would print paper out, have all the athletes fill it out, circle. I would tally up the score. I would put in a spreadsheet. So that's like the raw sports science right there, right? And the reason we were doing that is because we are trying to answer questions. And I think, that's one of the questions you have regarding sports science is just you're trying to answer questions that people have, and you're trying to understand the capacities of these internal or individual athletes to make them more resilient, more robust, so they can do their sport at a higher level. That's all you're really trying to do. So these technology pieces, I think people kind of view it as if I apply tech, I'm doing sports science, and that's not true. It's only going to allow you to understand things a little bit differently if you actually break down what you're looking at and why you're looking at it. And so that's where I've actually streamlined some things along my years. And I think too, working at my previous company of Strive, like we were looking at surface EMG, so actual like muscle. You're looking at amplitude and frequency of muscles, but then also too, we were looking at raw or accelerometry data. So it's tracks or accelerometry data. Like I had the chance to really dive into that to understand when people move, what happens, when people decelerate, what happens, when people are imbalanced, so called, when they're using more one limb more than the other, or they're not actually attenuating forces on one side, what that looks like. And so, long story short, where I'm going with this is like have a question you want to answer, why you're trying to answer it, and then kind of start the process, right? It's like a hypothesis. You're just trying to uncover layers of the onion to figure out one, how can I train the athlete better? And then two, allow them to do their sport better.
Great, great. I'm gonna ask you this. I know I asked like a lot of like experienced coach kind of the same question. Everybody have their like different thoughts on this is so the question is what happened if let's say the number don't match up with what you see?
What do you mean? Give me an example.
Like maybe on a force weight jump,
Yeah.
this guy need to take like way longer to jump. But if
Okay.
you see him like run on, let's say football, man, that guy's fast. But like a counter jump, like that probably kind of doesn't make sense.
Yeah. So I think what you're trying to ask, and I think it's when you watch sports, they look like they're achieving tasks at a very high rate or doing it very well. But when they jump on a force plate, it takes them forever to get off the ground. And then you start asking, well, why is this happening? I think this is going down the path of a little bit more motor learning in a sense. When things pick up, when limb speeds pick up, we can hide a lot as individuals. We're coupling joints. We're using our soft tissue in a different manner, so our tendons, our fascia. Whereas when you slow somebody down, you're adding constraints and it's going to be more muscle. So now, like, this is going into actually a really good area where when I was at Washington, we put together a framework that's looking at time constraints, no time constraints. It's four pieces. And so you're looking at force and you're looking at velocity, essentially, very general terms. But what you're trying to figure out here is when you have a ton of force, internal and external, with no time. It's really slow, allow them to generate a ton of force internally to move a bar or to push something or to leave a force plate, like you mentioned. But when there's time constraints, they got to do it as fast as possible. Those demands are very different. And I think when we see athletes run around, cut, change directions, we view it as they're very advanced or they're great at it, when really we don't know. And that's where like my brain goes is, are they really good at it? Or are they actually compensating or are they coupling joints to achieve a task? And when you actually freeze degrees of freedom or when you add constraints, how do they do that? That's like true like skill in my opinion.
Nice, nice. So kind of want to dive a little bit deeper into this.
Okay.
Um, so you mentioned maybe they're joint coupling, maybe there's some like compensation in it.
Yeah.
Um, in that case, do you do like movement assessment or like would you like break it down on the table like that kind of stuff?
So we do pieces of that. Yeah, we'll do like some on table stuff, looking at just pure just joint range of motion, passive range of motion, and then we're pretty simple. We use force plates for CMJs with hands on hips, and then we do hop tests, and then we'll use the Nord board for doing iso prone hamstring testing. And so we kind of cover high force with no time constraint, really. That's really a CMJ, in my opinion. Some guys take, 700 milliseconds to leave the plates. Whereas hopping is very different. That's going to be more elasticity. And then your prone, hamstring, you're looking at different things as well. RFD, but also max force. And so we kind of look at all those pieces as how do people generally move and what is their capacity, really. And then we kind of go from there. And we have like a layered system we kind of use. But at the end of the day, we're just trying to figure out where are athletes deficient, where are athletes going to break down, and how can we actually bulletproof those areas to make them more resilient. That's all it is. Um, so that's kind of our roadmap and our process. We don't have a very long, laborious process.
Nice, nice, nice. I love that. I love that. So, uh, I want to talk about like load management. Like load management is probably like one
Mm,
of the most like every strength coach like this, every performance coach like this concept like load management. Everybody
yeah.
discussing about it. but what I asked when like let's say football. When we do football, like how do like know like the athletes like just neuromuscular fatigue or like they're way past like overreaching, like overtraining? Like how do you know which stage are they in?
That's a great question. I don't know if anybody knows that answer. You're just trying to use the tech to answer those questions, right? So whether that's going to be, you're looking at force plate data, if you jump them frequently or not, you're looking at GPS data, you're looking at accelerometry data. So you're just trying to make those pieces into a soup to understand what's going on with these guys. Um, I will say load management probably has been an interesting topic, especially in the NBA, but also too in football. At the end of the day, my opinion is we actually need to push athletes' capacities higher. The demands of the sports are pretty high. We have to train them to that level, and we have to meet those demands or exceed those demands, just so they're prepared. Then that's D cells, that's excels, that's max V, and then that's repeatedly doing it. And so the process is, I mean, you can kind of talk about just layering in a process, like you're building athletes up. So no greater than a 10% increase in certain areas, making sure you have off days every so often. There's different strategies to use. Every team is going to be very different. It also meets the demand of the head coach and their practice style. So there's a lot of pieces that you have to kind of match up. So I don't know if I have the answer for that one other than just it's all about your internal structure and org and how they want to run it. But also, too, you're trying to educate, you're trying to help, and you're trying to support people to make those decisions and hedge risk.
Nice, nice. So do you guys at Arizona Cardinals use like the so-called acute to chronic workload ratio?
Kind of like the rear view mirror, right? Like you're kind of using that as okay, what's going on 7 versus 28, just in general. Not really paying attention to a whole lot, but we do look at it with certain metrics with certain guys. We do probably use it more with RTP. But I use that at University of Washington. I also use the exponentially weighted moving average at Washington. So I've done both. I do think they have value. Are they the gold standard that you have to abide by them? That's up to you. But I think at the end of the day, everyone kind of understands what they view beneficial or significant. No, we look at it in the rearview mirror, certain metrics. That's all.
Nice, nice. So uh the other thing that just like pop up in my head is like we got all those metrics, we got GPS, we got force plate data. In force plate, you can track peak force, time to peak force, jump height. GPS, you can check like top speed, high speed yardage, IMA. Um, just out of curiosity, if an athlete's starting to get fatigue, is it like is this top speed gonna drop off earlier or the peak force on the force plate?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't really know the answer to that one. And that's okay with me too, just saying I don't know. I'm not gonna sit here and try to act like I know, but I do think something to keep an eye on is actually decel. And why I'm saying that is because if you're getting fatigued and you're having neurological fatigue, it's going to take you a longer distance to decel. You're also not going to hit your max excel values that you used to be able to do. You're going to have a decaying factor. And so I think that's one way to look at it. Will you be on the plates longer? Yeah, probably. Um, will you not jump as high? Yeah, probably. So um, that's kind of like the process that I use. And that's why I keep talking about we need to keep boosting their actual capacities in the off seasons, and even like don't be um, as cautious to train guys a certain way in season. And I think we do a pretty good job of that. So I think the
Nice.
load management kind of gets in the way there, where it's like do like nothing and bubble wrap guys and make sure that they play Sundays and then they fall apart. And like, well, why is this happening? It's just you're chasing your tail a little bit here.
Nice, nice, nice. So uh the other part like the other question I have is like, uh, since we have all those sport technology, we have guys like we have coaches like lean on like couldn't do anything without force play, couldn't do anything without like GPS. We got coaches like really good coaches. They say they can see movements with their eyes. They can know when they're fatigued or not. They don't really need those technology. Like in your career, do you ever having like trouble to learn like those technology or learn how to utilize these metrics?
That's a good question. I think me going from pen to paper to where we are now, like I've had to learn. And so when a new piece of technology that I'm working with or I have access to, what I'll do is first thing I'll do is read about it. And the second thing I'll do is read research regarding it. And that's people applying it for research to try and figure out questions. So me early on with Catapult, I was looking at hamstring strains and looking at high speed running yards when I was at the University of Washington and how that was a pretty good determining factor. We then started applying it a certain way. Um, then we got 1080. Then I started looking at like running kinetics and kinematics and trying to understand that. And so that's why I kind of go back to like you understand the principles of certain things, you understand physics just from a bare bones level, Newton's three laws. You then can probably take the technology and apply it a certain way. But I think where people go wrong is they take the tech and they apply it without knowing those principles and they get lost. And now they're looking at all these metrics, all these numbers. They have spreadsheets, bigger than a 5 by 5 like card that's like the size of my head. So um, it's I think we have to get better with whittling down what is important. So we got to find the signal through the noise. And I think that's been my mission wherever I've been is just let's try and whittle this down. Let's not have as much fluff and let's just try and answer questions.
Nice. Um, Actually, this morning I was trying to like shadow with our sports science team at
Yeah.
the football, at football. And what they're doing today is like they use catapult to track their top speed. At the same time, they c- they use 1080 today.
Mhm.
So they're trying to figure out uh which speed like because the new 1080 had a variable setting. So you hit certain speed or certain distance, you can change the
Yeah.
resistance. So we're trying to like figure out like um how or when are they gonna reach top speed and how are we gonna set up like the 1080.
Mhm.
So uh for you guys, how do you like pair like just 1080 and like catapult top speed?
We've kind of had those questions internally as well, and it's we have just the 1080 Sprint. We don't have the 1082s, so we have the old just big box, the original OG one. Um, we've realized the average speed on 1080 is closer to the top speed on Catapult, whereas the peak speed on 1080 is not going to match with the peak speed on Catapult, if that makes sense. So the average run velocity that you hit on your 1080 that's going to be more it's going to be closer to the max V on Catapult. That's just observational at the moment. We haven't really done any like statistical modeling on that, but that's when we just eyeballed it. We're like, yeah, these are closer than this one. So kind of going to that too. We use just Catapult as almost like a heartbeat where it's like, okay, what are these guys doing? How fast are they running? What are the decel accelerations they're hitting? So the negative accelerations. What are, the change of directions left and right? Cool. We use the 1080 more of a training tool than anything.
Nice, nice. So um nowadays there's like more and more like deceleration. Do you also use 1080 to like train decel like you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, we'll do that too. We'll pull guys into D cells. Um, we'll use it for everything you just mentioned, right? Like we'll use it for Excel, we'll use it for max velocity, we'll use it for D cell, we'll use it for assisted running, we'll use it for assisted D cells to get higher braking forces. Um, yeah,
I feel like 1080 make everybody's life easy.
yeah. No, we're hoping to get a few more, but absolutely 1080 has been wonders, and I think they've done a great job of having resisted sprinting be a big linchpin in athletic performance. Um, and those guys have done a great job. But yeah, no, I think the 1080 is great, man. I love it.
Yeah, yeah. All right, I'm gonna jump to the next topic. I know you help like some athlete get back, return to play from an Achilles tendon injury. So can you
Yeah.
walk us through the return to play process for Achilles tendon injury?
Yeah. So I gave a presentation actually on the behalf of 1080 regarding this topic. And that's when Ola reached out and Adam from 1080 are like, yo, I think you should give this presentation. This is like PhD work. So it was me and a buddy of mine who at the time was my assistant at Washington. He's now the head strength coach at Seattle U. But we had kind of the same thing I had at Nevada, we had at Washington. So we had two Achilles ruptures 5 days apart from each other. Now, one was it was an avulsion. So the Achilles ripped off the bone, and the other one was mid tendon. So right above the calcaneus. And so I had never had that. No one in our building had ever had Achilles injuries or even ruptures. And so that happened. And my boss told me, he's like, hey, I want you to put together just like, in your opinion, what do you think happened and why? So I started digging through all this data. I started putting stuff together. And yeah, I mean, were there some loading errors? Yeah, I think so. Could we have maybe done a little better on the proactive side? Yeah, sure. That's always the case when you look back, though. So then started looking at more research. And so we started doing stuff with our Achilles guys about 3 weeks right after post op. Um, and it started off with very basic things. That was just unloaded plantar flexion ISOs. So they're actually sitting on a bench, pointing their toes with their knees locked out, trying to find their calf, their big toes, the arch, the FHL, going into their, soleus and gastroc. We stayed there for a while, but this is how we built a framework, and this framework now I use everywhere, kind of when I deal with anybody. And it's you take certain phases and you just keep stacking them. And so we hung out with ISOs for a very long time. Now, when I say ISOs, that's yielding ISOs, not overcoming. So we figured out is yielding ISOs through a lot of research we've combed through. Yielding ISOs, they actually help rebuild the tendon. Overcoming makes them stiffer. Yielding, you're going to have a little bit more stretch. So the stress strain cycle is going to be very different than doing overcoming. So did a lot of that in different postures, positions. And then we started adding very slow eccentrics on leg extension machines, not training the actual Achilles. So what we took the approach is let's start getting the proximal muscle stronger while we're still paying attention to the distal endpoint, feet, Achilles. And then once they started getting stronger in those areas and got upright and they got cleared to do other things, we then started having more upright postures with them. Isos and split squat, eccentric split squats, eccentric leg extension, hamstring curls. And we just started building this like profile of just going from isos, eccentrics to fast eccentrics to dynamic, which they're categories. We actually had subcategories within that. But what you're doing is you're looking at limb speed. As limb speeds pick up, eccentric demands pick up, forces pick up. And I think that was like the linchpin for us. That was like the light bulb moment where once these athletes' limbs started to pick up, forces go up. So we have to prepare them. When they get cleared to run, the forces that those limbs are going to experience need to be prepared for it. So that's internal. Got to get the internal forces strong first with the tendon and the muscle. And then you just add in eccentrics and fast eccentrics and dynamic. So we actually had from day of surgery to playing in their first game was 6 months to date. They were running against 30 kgs on a 1080 at 3 months.
That was fast. That was fast.
Fast. Every research article you read, like, so we comb through all the research on Achilles at the highest level, NBA, MLB, NFL, and all the Major League Soccers. 70% of the athletes that had Achilles ruptures, they came back within 8 to 12 months, outliers being 18 months. However, those people, those 70% of those people were operating at a decreased capacity. So they were coming back, but it was at a very low, or it was at a less neurological capacity than their injury, their pre-injury levels. So what we wanted to do was make sure our guys exceeded those levels, their healthy levels. And we got them to do that. And that was with, towards the end, we started to do assisted running. We're dragging them in at 120 max V. And I mean, these guys were handling it fine. And so they set new PRs at max V when we took them off resistance. They were split squatting, way more than they ever had. So it was pretty cool to watch. We kind of stumbled upon it. And me and the friend of mine were like, I think we're onto something here. So we're still employing this on some levels. It's just now he's somewhere else, I'm down here. And that's where it all kind of started.
So what is your thoughts on like I know like I think the past few years, especially this season, there's a lot of like Achilles tendon injury, and
Yeah.
people are debating about I think is it a field or like
So the turf's always going to be a question, right? Because the friction coefficient. I'm going to say these athletes don't have the ability to attenuate the forces that they're experiencing. And there's a mismatch. And it's happening really fast. So there's good research on like ACLs rupturing in basketball from video analysis where they actually rupture less than 50 milliseconds. That's pretty fast. So that's faster than max V when your foot's on the ground. So I think what we're seeing here is there was a mismatch with load and what they're going to experience. And I think now people are more cognizant of it. So I don't know why they're happening, but at the end of the day, there's a mismatch in loading the guys versus what they're experiencing. And so the way we built the framework was looking at it through the deceleration lens. Deceleration is a lot faster with way more ground reaction forces than anything we go through. So looking at that lens first, you're going to prepare yourself of how to train the athlete to get to that level.
cool. I always look at things like I know deceleration is a big part of like performance training and like we train deceleration through movement, can do
Yeah.
it with plyo, but I never really look at you like, oh, that like so in depth like that.
Yeah, like when this all happened, that allowed us to read a bunch of research. Our my whiteboard was like literally covered in all this like thoughts, theories, ideas, research articles. And so we combed through over 150 articles to try and find out like, okay, how do we fit all this together? And that led us to building this framework, which really just four pieces. It's very basic, but also it's very complex. And we've taken it from a motor learning aspect. We've taken it from like a neuromechanical lens. And so really anybody that's come through that, they have exceeded the benchmark. And so it's been great.
Nice. So, the next question would be like, uh, all those sports you work with all those experience, and now you're at the pro setting, probably like a lot of young strength coaches' dream. Do you have like any, let's say, if you have a chance to talk to like maybe 20 years ago, like yourself, what would you say to them?
One, I would say stay curious. What I mean by that is don't be afraid to keep learning and ask questions. Someone asked me earlier a few days ago, like, do you ever want to become an expert in something? I said, no. And they said, why not? And I said, because once you become an expert, that means you stopped learning. So for me, I'm always trying to learn. I'm always trying to find root problems. So what I would tell my younger self is be curious, keep learning, ask questions, and don't just stop on one thing in a sense like I've got it figured out or I have my system. I don't really like the term system. It seems too rigid to me. I like the word framework better. And the reason I'm saying that is because frameworks, you have like guardrails that you can kind of bounce within, whereas systems, it's very linear. Linear processes in this world, I don't think really happen very well or often. So I think the younger self, I would just tell them, be curious, keep learning, and then, work at a low level school first. Don't go to the NFL. Don't go to a big brand. Like I just look back at my time at University of Nevada, the guys I worked with and learned under, they all went to become head strength coaches. We also were in a room together, learning together, asking questions, drinking coffee, brewing coffee, lifting, trying new things. I think people are missing that nowadays because they want to get to the big brands of the NFL. I think what I went through to get to the NFL has helped me a lot, ton. If I did it in reverse orders, I'd probably be lost. So I'm not saying the NFL, like you can't go to it first, you can. It's just I think I struggled early on and I failed and had some shortcomings, which helped me along the way to get to where I am now to have things somewhat figured out. I wouldn't say I have the answer. I'm still learning and trying to figure it out, but I just I just see young strength coaches now like they want the pinnacle now. And all that's because of instant gratification now with Amazon and DoorDash. But there's too much access early on right now. You know what I'm saying? Like,
That's funny, man. I love that. I love that. That's funny.
yeah. So I don't know. I'm always learning, man. Like, keep reading. Like, my iPad I use, I'm highlighting articles, I'm reading research. So I think at the end of the day, it's for the betterment of the athlete, not yourself.
Yeah, I like that. So it's um do you ever like do you ever like have like the situation like you feel like you kind of lost in your career and like don't know
Yeah,
like
yeah.
like is it worth it or not to put that so much work?
I've had that a few times. Yeah. Yeah, where it's just like you're working and working and working and you don't feel like there's an end in sight sometimes, or you just feel like you can't take a break, or you're just worn out. I think so. And I think college is doing that at a higher rate now just because it's 24/7 with recruiting. It's also, transfer portal, NIL, all these other factors, right? Or NLI, whatever it is. Yeah, people getting paid, whatever. Um, I've gone through that. I think that's natural. I think that's a natural process because then you kind of recalibrate. And that's for me the off season where yeah, the season's over. I kind of sit there and I'm like, okay, recharge my batteries. What does that mean? Reading, researching, going on walks with my wife and dog and doing things I normally wouldn't do. Um, it's just decluttering the brain because in season it's so regimented and it's so structured that you don't really have time sometimes to do those things because you're helping athletes, you're traveling, you're at games, you're at practice. And so the off season for me is the time that gets a little wild because I start coming up with crazy ideas. I start researching, I start reading, I start building. So yeah.
So what's the next probably interesting topic you're gonna look into, you're gonna do research on?
Great question. I just got asked this a few days ago. I have gone down the lens of trying to learn more about Nikolai Bernstein's model of motor learning and freezing degrees of freedom. And so conscious learning versus subconscious learning. And then reading Carl Newell's model, right? So that's the triangle, which is task, environment, individual, and then you have coordination control in the middle. So learning about that, and that's the reason I'm learning about that is because that's sport. And I think the younger me would have said, no, Eric, that's not sport. What do you mean, man? Just lift weights. Um, so I think at the end of the day, we have to have more of a holistic picture. We have to understand broader topics to apply these principles, or sorry, to understand these principles to apply these methods. And so why I'm going down this rabbit hole is because what I've seen and what I feel here at this level is a lot of these guys are the most skillful movers you'll ever see. That doesn't mean that they're doing it in an optimal way. A lot of them are probably doing things suboptimally, but they're still achieving a task. Kind of we just talked about, right? So adding guardrails, aka constraints to movement, where guys have to do things a certain way, and if they don't, they have to learn why they can't do it that way, or they fail, or they don't feel certain muscles. And so that's why I think ISOs are so important for athletes. They feel muscles, they feel the posture. You can then cue them to get to a certain position. They understand what that feels like. So then kinesthetic awareness, but also to internal muscle coordination. Um, so a roundabout answer, there you go. Motor learning, motor programming, stuff like that.
Man, I'm looking into that kind of like the same topic too. I love that stuff. I
Just
just feel,
because I think I'll just jump in real quick. And I think the reason is I've seen a lot of people across my years, and the friend of mine who had his degree in biomechanics, he was like kind of opening my eyes that too, where it's like, hey, when you add constraints to these guys, look how they move. Like we need this because it's actually going to expose them and it's challenging them and it's now unlocking degrees of freedom that they can use. So we're adding more tools to their movement toolbox. So when they get thrown into chaotic environments, they can do things.
man, I like that. I like that. I mean, I'm not saying like traditional like strength training, traditional like lifting heavy, like trying to like power clean heavy is wrong. I love that. I still do that. But like I feel like you mentioned, watching how they move and giving them constraint and watch how it changes, that fascinated me recently. I love that stuff.
Oh, it's amazing. And that's what I've started doing. And I watch it and I'm like, yeah, these guys need this, but they get better. When you take the constraint away and they move, you're like, whoa, that cleaned things up. Where we were so, I think early on, when I say early on, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we were so driven on cueing. Do this, do this, do this, do this, do this. And that's where I think a lot of people have done great work in that area. Nick Winkelman with external cues and stuff like that. But this now I'm starting to learn more about it. I'm like, all right, this makes sense to me. Like add constraints early on, freeze, some limbs or degrees of freedom, have them feel certain things, take a few things away, speed up movement, and now look at it.
It's nice. Man, I'm sorry I didn't follow the list I sent to you.
Nah, you're good.
It's like your answer just fascinating me. My brain is like explode.
Hey, that's the best, like I've done a few other podcasts where they send like formal, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I look at it, I'm like, yeah, no, we're out of here. Like we're just gonna start firing away. And I think the best way is just make it organic, like let ideas come, start asking questions and be curious. And so yeah.
Nice. So, for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you?
Well, probably Instagram or Twitter is probably the best way. So, I don't even know my handle. Hold on a second here.
It's Kyle
My
Sammons.
yeah, so like my Instagram handle is Kyle underscore Sammons underscore. And then my Twitter is I think Coach K Sammons or something like that. But as you can tell, I don't use it a whole lot, but yeah, reach out there. And I think I've been interested too in maybe writing more for me. Like I'm not a great writer, but I think that's a way for me to get thoughts on paper. And so I've always like talking to people. I like learning. I like chatting about ideas. So people reach out if you want. That's where you can reach out to me. Um, Kind of what you did, right? Like hit me
Yeah,
up on Instagram and I'll fire back some ideas or questions and we'll go from there. But that's probably the best way.
cool.